Hi, I'm Rich Henderson. In schools around the world today, we're going to flip through and we could see a couple years ago what classrooms look like in our schools. Here's a classroom in Japan. Here's a classroom in Tunisia. The students are all grouped together with their peers. They're having fun. They're smiling. Here's a remote school in Vietnam. Students are, in colorful seating, but they're largely in rows, facing their teacher who's in the front of the class. What pictures and what's really changing in the education environment today is we work for a technology company. Where's the technology? Where's the technology? Because these students are largely, in these environments and they've been forced to leave those environments. So with schools being closed around the world, with teachers having to work remotely, students having to connect in, they don't have these environments anymore. So what's the new reality? What's the new world of education? Well, in a post-COVID environment, students are spaced out in those classrooms. They're still back in those classrooms largely, but you can see they're spaced out. They don't have as many students in there. They have less teachers. They've had to go find new teaching situations. So they're teaching outside because maybe their school building was closed or they had an outbreak. In China, they are largely back in the classrooms, kind of countrywide. But you can see that they still got maintaining this spacing. And then in some cases, they're having to teach remote completely. So in this school in China, there's no students in there. The teacher is teaching remote, and they've embraced this concept of a master teacher. So we're seeing technology start to be used in education, but largely one thing we've learned from COVID-19 and this kind of remote learning crisis is that remote learning requires technology. So if we look at kind of where we are today, if I showed you this chart in April, at that point, 92% of the world's schools were closed. And they had really this learning freeze. I mean, for weeks, months at a time, schools tried to do what we call crisis remote learning, to connect students in remotely. But it was a real challenge. We didn't have the tools. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people didn't have the technology. So there's been this huge surge in demand for student and teacher devices. Some are partially open, but everyone is searching for what is the solution for remote learning and how do we address that. So in today's session, we're going to talk about the solutions that Lenovo is bringing to address this remote learning crisis. And what does it look like when we go beyond this? Well, it's not just about remote learning, it's about what we call instructional continuity. So instructional continuity is this idea that no matter where you're learning from, you need to have those same set of tools and that same ability to connect with your teacher and your peers that you had when you're in the classroom. So if you're in a classroom setting and you have access to a device and the tools and the software and the instructional method with your teacher, that's great. When you're in a hybrid classroom, you should have those same tools. And when you're in a remote learning situation, you should have those same tools. So that instructional continuity allows teachers to be more efficient without having to learn a completely new set of tools from one thing to another. Another area that we're seeing that is really strong in this is higher education. So higher education has been addressing this for years. I mean, a lot of us can go into higher education. We can take remote classes. We can take classes from another country online. So they have been really perfecting this offering. And a lot of higher education institutions were able to just go quickly to online. And this is really important as we think about kind of the future of education, because it's not just about achieving your degree. Because I'm in my mid-40s, I got my degree over 20 years ago. And why I love that experience and it helped me, I'm not really using those same skills fully. I've developed and I need new skills to continue to advance my career. So this ability to approach the adult learners and this skill-based ecosystem that we have in the workplace is really driving the need for more of this in higher education. How do we connect more professionals into a remote and hybrid learning environment for higher education? If we think about the challenges that this caused in K-12, this crisis remote learning, they're really dramatic. So you had this need for instructional continuity, and that was driven by devices, right? So I mentioned earlier that remote learning requires technology, right? Students can connect with their phone, and a lot of them did borrow their parents' phones in order to join their Zoom calls or their Meet calls in the spring. But that's not really enough. Students need to be able to create. They need to be able to use that. So they all need devices. And we've seen this huge demand globally for a device. And you've probably been a part of that if you're watching this, is trying to get devices for your students and your teachers. But then once you have those devices, fully deploying those for remote use is completely different from having them in a cart or in a lab station in your schools. These are all remote now in the homes of students. And so you need additional device management. You need additional cybersecurity and endpoint management. You need content filtering for at-home use. And then you need to be able to collect those devices back up. And then beyond just the device management pieces, you need classroom management tools, and you also need teaching, the ability to reach and teach with great instructional resources. So as we think about kind of all of these things that go into instructional continuity, it means that Lenovo is adjusting its strategy to address that challenge. We are responding as an education technology partner to education by creating an end-to-end model for our partners and customers. And that means it's not just about the teacher and student devices, which is still important to us. We are the number one and have been the number one device provider in education for a number of years. But we're now extending beyond that to think about education as a solution. And that includes the accessories that you need. It includes emerging solutions. It includes services and software, and even the data center and analytics. How do we leverage our technology capability to empower more efficient teachers so they can make better decisions? And we can leverage the data center and tools that we have with our technology to make learning more personalized and more available to students. So let me talk about some of these specific offerings. One is distance learning, and that's this idea of, in order to have the ability to have that instructional continuity, you need the right distance learning offerings. And that comes with cybersecurity, remote class management, and instructional resources. Now, I talked about some of this early on, but education is actually one of the highest attacked areas. Cybersecurity threats in schools, and you may have seen in the news that Miami-Dade schools actually had to shut down for 3 days because a student found a service that could attack his school. So this cybersecurity threats are real. They are in higher education as well as in K-12, and we've got some great partnerships with Absolute and SentinelOne for endpoint security management. If you think about remote class management, this is where it's really important for the teacher to be able to manage that class session. If you're in a classroom environment and the teacher can walk around the classroom and look over someone's shoulder, hey, how's it going? What you working on? That's really hard to do in a remote learning environment. But with Land School, you can kind of have all of your students on a dashboard that you can see what they're working on, what they're looking at. You can redirect all those students onto the assignment that you need them to be working on. You can turn that off so that they're all in free roam mode, but you can still see thumbnails of what each student is working on, and you can redirect each student. So in a virtual learning, in a remote learning environment, that capability is critical. Content filtering is another one that is very different from a school setting. If you're in a school setting, you have every student connecting to your Wi-Fi, right? So you have complete control over what comes in or goes out on your network. When you release those devices into the wild, and now you've got wild students out there, trying to figure out what they can do, asking for help, needing help. It's determining how to help those students, and these types of filtering can really help. BARC is a great partner for monitoring and alerting school authorities on dangerous or need help type terms from students in regards to bullying and threats. And DNS Filter has been a fantastic filtering offering for students that are connecting in from home. Now, One of the hardest areas to connect in from home is instructional resources. A lot of us work for a technology company, and we're used to being on these virtual conference calls and Zoom calls all day long sometimes. But it's so tiring. So how do you really connect in with students? Well, you need great instructional resources. You need tech-enabled learning like Exploros. You need the creativity apps that allow students to be creators of content, not just consumers. And then finally, you need STEM-based content so that students can have access to these difficult topics in science and mathematics and engineering. And how do you learn those from home when you're just staring at a screen? If you get into some of this immersive technology, is really where that starts to change. So let me tell you a little bit about what a hybrid classroom looks like. You can see here that the teacher is in front of the class. There's students in the classroom setting, and there's the teacher device that's sitting on the table. There's a compute box that's also sitting there and a mic pod. So those create this ability for the teacher to be in the classroom, and then you can see students are connecting in remotely. They have their own devices, they have tablets, and then their audio is coming into the classroom through the sound bar. There's a camera that's picking up the content that the teacher is delivering on the whiteboard. And then there's also a screen here that's being displayed that shows all the students connecting remotely. So you've got these cameras, sound bars, microphones that are connecting students in to remote learning. Now, what's next is this ability to do this across different platforms. So whether you have Microsoft Teams or you have Zoom, we have two options there. You can go with a Tiny, which is a ThinkSmart edition of our Tiny product with Logitech as our device partner, or you can go with the ThinkSmart Hub. So the ThinkSmart Hub was designed for office environments, office conference rooms. It's a great way to manage your meetings. It allows you to share content, and Teams for EDU is great in terms of an application that allows you to collaborate, to share files, to have the video conferencing pieces. And when you pair that with these Logitech kits, you can have that hybrid classroom set up. And then finally, the Meet-based solution. Now, these are very reasonable solutions for a classroom environment, less than $5,000 or so for some of these. But we're super excited to bring these here. As I think about where students need additional help, though, it's some of this STEM technologies. So that's where I wanted to introduce VR Classroom 2. And we're rolling this out in multiple countries around the world. The idea here is that IT administrators can manage these VR headsets, whether they're in a school environment or at home. The school IT admins can really manage all the content, they can deploy settings, they can update these headsets remotely. Let's say that Sally has a trip to the mountains with her family, and she takes her camera and takes some 360 pictures, or maybe even creates a 360 video. The IT admins can then load that up into the portal and push it out to all of the headsets in the school or in that class. And then the teachers, when it's time for the class session to begin in VR, they open Land School Air and they can start a classroom session. And that experience will start on all of those headsets. And that allows that content to be easily loaded and distributed throughout. And this works whether you're in a classroom setting or whether you're in home or somewhere in between. It's that ability to do instructional continuity that's really important, and we have that with VR Classroom 2. But as I think about all these kind of larger issues, there are still some ongoing major challenges ahead. We have national teacher shortages that are happening in some of our largest countries. India is one of the most challenged in terms of teachers. And Lenovo India has been driving a campaign to enable volunteers to act as teachers. And so our campaign for education there is to find additional teachers to volunteer to help educate students. The digital divide continues to get wider as well. As we think about, and we've talked about remote learning, students need access to technology, and they need access to connections as well. And so we're looking at expanding our line of products for 5G, for mobile broadband connections on those student devices to allow students to connect into these great telecommunications providers to give them access. Social emotional learning. If you have children, think about what it must be for them going through this where they were going to school every day, they were seeing their friends, they were having lunch, they were playing on the playground. And now they're not. So how do we cross that boundary of social emotional learning? Well, we need ways to connect with students to make sure that they're on track, that their education is for them. And that's where a lot of our AI programs are coming in. We're creating AI tools and AI programs to detect and to personalize education for these individual students. And then finally, the lost year. A lot of people are saying that this coronavirus epidemic and students being separated from their teachers for so long is going to create this loss in productivity, in learning. So Lenovo's committed as an education technology partner to pull these solutions together, to provide them to connect students in, to continue that instruction, whether they're in person, whether they're at home, or whether they're in a hybrid learning situation from everywhere. So thank you for your time today to listen to our education strategy.